Eleanor Whitmore stepped out of the carriage and froze. Because standing on those stone steps, tall and still as a man carved from regret, was Alexander Waverley. The Duke. The man who had destroyed her with 4 sentences and never looked back. Her hands gripped her bag so hard her knuckles went white. 3 years. 3 years she had burned every letter, swallowed every tear, and built herself back from nothing. And now her sister's wedding had led her straight to his door. Pacha. If this story already has your heart pounding, subscribe to our channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The morning Eleanor Whitmore received the letter that ended everything, she had been standing in her mother's kitchen, humming a song she no longer remembered the name of. She was happy that morning. That was the part that still twisted something sharp in her chest, even 3 years later. She had been happy. The letter was short, barely half a page, written in handwriting she had memorized in a voice she had trusted completely. Dear Miss Whitmore, after careful consideration, I find that our continued correspondence is no longer appropriate or beneficial to either party. I wish you well in all future endeavors. A. Waverley. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No word of the promises he had made standing in her father's garden at dusk. His voice low and steady, his hand barely brushing hers like he was afraid to break something precious. She had read that letter 17 times before she accepted that she had not misunderstood a single word. Then she folded it, set it on the windowsill, and never cried in front of anyone again. Her mother had found her an hour later, staring at the wall. Eleanor, what's happened? Nothing, Mama. You look pale as milk. I'm fine. Her mother had studied her for a long moment, the way mothers do when they know something is terribly wrong and also know better than to push. Then she had set a cup of tea on the table and quietly left the room. Eleanor had drunk the tea, drunk the atsui. Then she had gone upstairs, taken every letter Alexander had written her, every single morning letter, 37 of them folded and tied with a piece of cord she had saved from the first bouquet of wildflowers he had left at her door, and she had put them in the small iron stove in her bedroom. She watched every page curl and blacken. She felt nothing, or she told herself she felt nothing. That was the first lie she ever told herself. It would not be the last. 3 years is a long time when you are rebuilding yourself from ash. Eleanor had thrown herself into her family's needs with the kind of determination that leaves no room for grief. She managed household accounts, tutored the younger children in the village for a small fee, and helped her father negotiate the sale of their modest acreage when the crop season turned poor. She became by necessity, and by will, a woman who needed no one. People in their small Virginia county called her practical. Some called her cold. She preferred surviving. Because the alternative, sitting somewhere quiet and allowing herself to remember what it had felt like to be loved by a man like Alexander Waverley, was a door she had nailed shut from the inside. She did not date. She did not accept invitations to the autumn socials. She turned down 2 perfectly decent proposals from perfectly decent men with such calm, pleasant certainty that neither of them could even bring himself to feel insulted. She was fine. She was absolutely, completely fine. And then her sister Charlotte had burst through the front door of their home on a Thursday afternoon in September. Cheeks flushed, eyes wet with happy tears, holding out her left hand with a ring on it. Eleanor. Oh, Eleanor, say you're happy for me, say you are. Eleanor had crossed the room, taken her little sister's hands, and kissed her cheek with genuine warmth. I am so happy for you. Tell me everything. His name is Thomas Hargrove. You've met him last spring at the Daltons, the tall one with the good laugh. I remember him. He is so good, Eleanor. He's kind and funny, and he listens. He actually listens when I talk. Then you've found the rarest thing in Virginia. Charlotte had laughed, thrown her arms around her older sister, and squeezed until Eleanor's ribs ached. We're to be married at his family's estate. It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen, Eleanor. You're going to love it. Whose estate? The Hargroves arranged the ceremony through their family connection. The house belongs to one of Thomas's oldest family friends. A duke, if you can believe it. Very old family, very grand property. Charlotte's eyes went wide the way they did when she was about to describe something magnificent. Waverley Estate. The name hit Eleanor like a hand to the chest. She kept her face perfectly still. Waverley. Yes, have you heard of it? They say it's stunning. There are roses everywhere, a library with more books than the county reading house, and the most beautiful gardens in all of... When is the ceremony? Charlotte blinked at the interruption. The first Saturday in October. Eleanor, are you all right? You went very white. I'm happy for you, Eleanor said, and she meant it even as something cold settled at the base of her spine. I'll be there. Wouldn't miss a single moment. She had told herself standing in that kitchen that it meant nothing. Waverley was a common enough name. Virginia was full of old estates with old names. She had talked herself all the way into believing it. She had talked herself through packing her trunk through the 2-day carriage journey through the rolling green hills that grew more familiar with every mile, even as she pretended they were strange. She had talked herself all the way to those stone steps, and then the carriage door opened, and there he was. Alexander Waverley had not changed the way she had prayed he would. He had not gone soft or resentful or thin with bitterness. He stood on the steps of his estate, his home, the home she had not known she was walking into, tall and composed and achingly familiar. And when their eyes met across the drive, he went absolutely still, like a man who had just seen something he believed he would never see again, like a man who had been waiting. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She made herself breathe. She made herself step down from the carriage with her back straight and her chin level and her expression exactly as calm as a woman who had every right to be here and not a single reason to fall apart. Miss Whitmore. His voice was low, careful, like he was testing whether it was really her or whether he was imagining things. Your Grace. Her voice was even. She was proud of herself. Thank you for the hospitality. My sister is very happy. Something moved across his face. Eleanor. If someone could show me to my room, she said, turning toward the housekeeper who had appeared at Alexander's shoulder. I'd like to rest before dinner. She walked past him. She did not look back. She did not allow herself to notice whether he watched her go. Yeah, her room was on the east wing away from the main hall. She stood at the window and pressed both palms flat against the cool glass and breathed slowly until her hands stopped shaking. You are here for Charlotte, she said quietly to herself. That is all. You are here for Charlotte, and then you are going home. The gardens below were full of roses. She looked away from them. Dinner that first evening was an exercise in elegant torture. Thomas Hargrove was, as Charlotte had promised, a genuinely good man, warm-eyed and easy in his laughter, the kind of man who made you feel immediately at ease. Eleanor liked him within the first 5 minutes and was relieved because she needed to like him. Her sister deserved someone worth liking. Thomas's mother, Margaret Hargrove, was a sharp-featured woman in her 60s who sat at the dinner table as if she had grown there. She watched Eleanor with the quiet, calculating gaze of a woman who made it her business to understand social arrangements. Victoria Ashford was seated 2 chairs to Eleanor's left. Eleanor would not know to pay attention to her yet. But Victoria was already watching. Victoria was always watching. She was perhaps 26 with golden hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, dressed in silk the color of pale water. She was a childhood friend of Thomas's, according to Charlotte's introduction. She had known the Waverley family for years. She attended every event at this estate. You must be Charlotte's older sister, Victoria said with that smile, leaning forward just slightly. Thomas has told me so much about your family. I understand you live quite quietly in the county. I do, Eleanor said pleasantly. How lovely. I imagine it must feel quite extraordinary to visit somewhere like this? A small pause. For someone not accustomed to these surroundings. Charlotte's fork clinked against her plate. Eleanor reached for her water glass. Extraordinary is exactly the word. Eleanor agreed, warm and entirely unbothered. Thomas, how long have you known the Duke? The conversation shifted. Victoria settled back. But across the table, Eleanor caught Alexander looking at her. He looked away the moment she met his eyes. She turned to Thomas and smiled and asked him how he and Charlotte had met, and she listened to the whole delightful story, and she did not look at Alexander Waverley again for the rest of that meal. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark with the ceiling above her, and her mind running like a river with no banks, and she thought about all the things she would not let herself feel during dinner. The way his voice had said her name, Eleanor. Not Miss Whitmore for the first second. Eleanor. Like it had slipped out before he could stop it. Like it lived in the front of his mouth. She turned onto her side. She thought about the 37 letters. She thought about the 4 sentences that had ended everything. She thought about how he had looked standing on those steps. Not triumphant, not indifferent, not any of the things she had imagined a man looks like when he has moved on. He had looked, and she hated herself for landing on this word, relieved. Like he had been holding his breath for 3 years. She sat up in the dark. Stop it, she told herself. She got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to find the library. She should have known. The library was where they had spent every long evening 3 years ago. Books from floor to ceiling. 2 armchairs by the fire, the smell of leather binding and candle wax, and something that had always felt to Eleanor like a room full of breathing. She pushed open the door and stopped. Alexander was already there. He was standing by the window with a book in his hand that he was clearly not reading, still dressed for dinner, and when the door opened he turned fast. They stared at each other. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. I'll go. Please don't. She hesitated. Please, he said again. Quieter. She did not leave. But she did not go further into the room either. She stood in the doorway, like a woman who had not yet decided which direction was safe. I won't make the evening uncomfortable, he said. Eleanor. I need you to know that I didn't know you would be here. Not until Thomas mentioned the Whitmore family last month. By then the arrangements were already... It doesn't matter. It does. Because if I had known I would have warned you, given you the choice. She looked at him directly. The choice to stay home. The choice, he said carefully, of whether to see me. A beat of silence. Would you have come? He asked. If you'd known, she considered lying. I don't know, she said honestly. He nodded like that was the most honest answer he could have hoped for, and somehow that made it worse. She should have left. She sat in the other armchair by the fire because her body made the decision before her mind could argue, and she stared at the fireplace. And for a long time, neither of them spoke. It was Alexander who finally broke the silence. You look well, Eleanor. You don't need to say that. It isn't flattery. You look well. He paused. You look strong. Something in her chest pulled. I had to be, she said, and she had not meant to say that, but there it was. He said nothing. But she heard him exhale. And she heard in that exhale something that sounded terribly like guilt. She turned to look at him. What? She said. Nothing. Alexander. His name in her voice the first time she had said it made them both go still. He looked up. What happened? She said. I want to understand. I spent 3 years not understanding and I made my peace with it, but I'm sitting in your library at midnight and I find I still want to know. Why? Her voice stayed level. Barely. Why 4 sentences after everything? Why did it have to be 4 sentences? The firelight moved across his face, and Alexander Waverley looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not guilt, not pity. Confusion. Real, raw, unguarded confusion. Eleanor, he said. What letter? She stopped breathing. What are you talking about? You wrote to me. You said... I wrote to you every morning for 6 weeks, he said. And then your letters stopped. And then I received one letter in your handwriting telling me you had reconsidered, and that we should not continue. The room tilted. I never wrote that letter, she said. His face changed. I never wrote your letter either, he said. They stared at each other. And in the space between them, in that fire-lit library where they had once talked about futures, something enormous and terrible began to take shape. Not a broken promise, not a coward's retreat. Something far worse. A lie so perfectly constructed that it had destroyed two people who never stopped loving each other. And somewhere in this house, the person who built that lie was sleeping without a single ounce of shame. Eleanor's hands folded in her lap, curled slowly into fists. Show me the letter, she said quietly. Eleanor. Show it to me. Whatever letter you received in my name, I want to see it. He stood. He crossed to the far bookcase, reached behind the third volume on the upper shelf, and she noticed that without thinking, without explaining how he knew it was there, her eyes had gone straight to that shelf. Because she knew this library, because she had been here before, because something about this room had always been theirs. He brought her the letter. She unfolded it with steady hands. She read it once. Then she set it very carefully on the arm of the chair. That is not my handwriting, she said. It's very close, Alexander said. It is close, she agreed. But the way I form my E, I always curve the bottom differently. And here, she pointed to one line. I would never write reconsidered. I would say thought better of. It was a habit my father gave me. He said reconsidered was a word cowards used. She looked up. Alexander was watching her with an expression like a man standing at the edge of something he had not let himself believe in for 3 years. Someone forged these letters, she said. Yes, someone who knew us both well enough to copy our handwriting, who had access to our correspondence, who knew the particular phrases we used. Yes, and who would benefit? Eleanor said slowly, each word coming out careful and cold, from making sure that we never saw each other again. Alexander was very still. Eleanor picked up the letter again, and on the far wall just outside the library door that they had both forgotten to close entirely, a pair of silk shoes made no sound at all on the hardwood floor as their owner quietly walked away into the dark. She did not sleep at all. She lay in her room with the forged letter memorized and a cold certainty settling into her bones. Someone in this house had done this. Someone who was still in this house. She thought about the dinner table. She thought about Margaret Hargrove's calculating eyes. She thought about Victoria Ashford's watercolored smile and her careful little dig about someone not accustomed to these surroundings. And she thought about what kind of woman watches a room full of people the way Victoria had watched that room, not with enjoyment, not with boredom, but with the quiet attention of someone managing a situation they had created. She was up before dawn. She dressed without calling for any help. She went to find Charlotte. Charlotte was at her dressing table, half awake, wrapped in a robe, when Eleanor let herself in without knocking. Eleanor, it's barely sunrise. Tell me about Victoria Ashford. Charlotte blinked. What? Victoria. She's Thomas's childhood friend. How long has she known the Waverley family? Eleanor, why are you asking me this at dawn? Charlotte? Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and held her sister's eyes. This matters. How long? Charlotte set down her hairbrush. She could read Eleanor's face the way only a sister could see under the calm, the thing that was not calm at all. Years, she said quietly. Since they were children, I think. She spent summers here. She and Alexander were... Charlotte stopped. There were rumors for a while that Victoria expected him to, that she'd assumed she would one day be Duchess of Waverley. Yes. Charlotte was watching her now with worried eyes. Eleanor, what is happening? Eleanor stood. Nothing yet, she said. Go back to sleep. Eleanor, she was already at the door. I need you to do something for me, she said without turning around. At breakfast, watch Victoria. Don't let her know you're watching. But watch how she looks at me. Why, what will I see? Eleanor's hand rested on the doorframe. Fear, she said, and she walked out into the early morning light with 3 years of grief remaking itself quietly and with great precision into something far more useful, something that felt very much like fury. Breakfast was civil. Eleanor was extraordinary at civil. She sat across from Victoria Ashford and smiled and passed the bread and asked Thomas gentle questions about his family's history in the county and listened with every appearance of genuine interest. All the while she watched, the way Victoria's gaze moved to her more often than was natural. The way Victoria's hand had gone briefly still when Eleanor mentioned very casually that she and Alexander had run into each other in the library late last evening. The way Victoria said too lightly, "Oh, how lovely reminiscing about old times," with that smile, and then reached for her coffee before Eleanor could answer, cutting off the moment before it could breathe. "You are nervous," Eleanor thought, keeping her face perfectly pleasant. "You're afraid of what he might have told me, or what I might have remembered." She ate her toast. She answered a question Margaret Hargrove asked about the county road situation. And underneath the table, completely invisible, her fingers had stopped trembling. She had her answer. She did not have her proof. Not yet. But she would. Because in 4 days, her sister would marry in this house. And Eleanor Whitmore was not leaving without the truth. She found Alexander in the garden at mid-morning. He had been watching for her, she could tell by the way he turned before she had made a sound. "I need you to pull every letter you still have," she said without preamble. "Everything from that period, both real and forged. I have them. I need to see my real letters, the ones I actually wrote, and I need to know who in your household had access to the correspondence." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "This is going to hurt some people," he said carefully. "It has already hurt some people," Eleanor said. "The difference is, this time they'll know why." He looked at her. "You haven't changed," he said, and it was not a complaint. "I have changed completely," she said, "but not in the ways that matter." He almost smiled. She turned back toward the house. "The letters," she reminded him. "Eleanor." She stopped, did not turn. "I need to say, even before we know what happened, even before the proof, I am sorry. For believing it, for not coming to find you. I should have come." Her jaw tightened. She stood very still for 3 full seconds. "Yes," she said. "You should have." And she walked inside. She did not let herself feel the warmth in that until she was alone. And even then, she only allowed herself one moment, one single quiet moment of something that was not quite forgiveness, and not quite relief, but was somewhere in the aching space between the two. Then she straightened her spine. She had work to do, and somewhere in this elegant house, in watercolored silk, moving through rooms, she believed she owned a woman who had destroyed 2 lives and felt no remorse, was about to find out that Eleanor Whitmore had not come back as a ghost. She had come back as a reckoning. The letters were kept in a locked mahogany box in Alexander's study, and when he set them on the desk in front of Eleanor that afternoon, she noticed immediately that his hands were not entirely steady. She did not comment on it. She pulled up a chair, sat down, and began reading. Her own letters. First, the real ones. The ones she had actually written. The morning letters she had sent him during those 6 weeks 3 years ago. Reading them was like opening a wound she had been careful not to touch. She recognized every word, every turn of phrase, the way she had written about the creek behind her father's property at dawn, the way she had teased him about his formal vocabulary, the way she had said in the very last letter before everything stopped, "I find I can no longer imagine a morning that doesn't begin with writing to you." She set that one face down. "All right," she said, keeping her voice even. "Now the forged one." Alexander placed it beside the stack. She held it next to her real letters and studied both for a long time without speaking. Alexander stood at the window with his arms crossed and his jaw tight and said nothing because he had the good sense to understand that she needed silence. "Same paper stock," she said finally. "Yes. Whoever did this had access to the paper I used. The same supplier." She tapped the corner of the forged letter. "This isn't a coincidence. Someone either took paper from my home or purchased from the same source with enough care to match it exactly." "That requires planning," Alexander said. "Months of it." She looked up. This wasn't jealousy acting in the moment. This was deliberate, organized. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had enough time to do it carefully. Alexander unfolded his arms and came closer to the desk. He picked up the forged letter and stared at it like he was trying to remember why he had ever believed it. "I should have gone to you," he said again. "Yes," she said again. "But you didn't, and we've acknowledged that. Let's not spend time on it now." She picked up one of her real letters. "I want to know who had access to your correspondence at that time. Who handled your mail?" "My housekeeper, Mrs. Crew, who has been with this family for 30 years, and who I would trust with my life." Who else, he thought. "My secretary at the time, a young man named Pierce. He left my employment the following year, moved north. Worth finding?" "And guests," Alexander said slowly. "We had guests that autumn. It was the season. There were parties nearly every week." Who attended? He listed names. Most meant nothing to Eleanor. But halfway through the list, she heard one that made her very still. "Victoria Ashford," she said. "She's known the family since childhood. She and her mother were here almost every other week." Eleanor set the letters down. "She told me at breakfast," Eleanor said carefully, "that she has been at this estate for years. She knows your staff. She knows your habits. She knows your paper stock." Alexander went quiet. "She was at my home too," Eleanor said. "Do you remember? She came with Charlotte once they had struck up a friendship through Thomas. This was 3 years ago, just at the beginning of the autumn season. She visited twice." Alexander turned to look at her. "She was at both houses," he said. "She was at both houses," Eleanor confirmed, "with access to both sets of correspondence. In a position to observe both of us closely enough to replicate the way we wrote." The silence in the room was not comfortable. It was the silence of two people standing on the edge of a truth that is going to make everything worse before it makes anything better. "We don't have proof," Alexander said. "Not yet." "Eleanor." "I know." She stood. "We need to be careful. She is Thomas's oldest friend. Charlotte's wedding is in 4 days. If we are wrong, we destroy everything. If we are right and we move too fast, she denies it and we still destroy everything." She smoothed her dress with flat, deliberate hands. "We need her to tell us herself." "And how do you intend to accomplish that?" Eleanor picked up the forged letter one more time and looked at it. "By letting her believe," she said quietly, "that she has already won." She set the letter back on the desk and walked out. Alexander stared at the space she had left for a long moment. Then he exhaled, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt like breathing. The plan was simple. The way a surgeon's cut is simple, precise, deliberate, and terrible if it goes wrong. Eleanor would not confront Victoria. She would not accuse her. She would not whisper to Charlotte, or pull Thomas aside, or make any move that could be interpreted as attack. Instead, she would do the exact opposite of what Victoria expected. She would be warm. She would be open. She would make Victoria believe that Eleanor had come back for Alexander, that she was foolish enough to hope that she was exposing her heart all over again, and she would watch very carefully for what Victoria did with that belief. Because a person who has done what Victoria did does not stop. They manage. They monitor. And the moment they feel something slipping out of their control, they reach out to take hold of it again. Eleanor was counting on exactly that. She found Victoria in the sitting room an hour later, and she came in without the careful distance she had maintained at breakfast. She sat down close. She accepted the offer of tea. She let her shoulders drop the way they do when a person is pretending not to be guarded. "I owe you an apology," Eleanor said. Victoria looked up with perfectly controlled surprise. "Whatever for? I was short with you at breakfast. I was tired from the journey, and I took it out on the morning, which is unfair to everyone." She smiled. Not the polished social smile, but something softer, something that looked like vulnerability. "I'm not always graceful in new surroundings. Charlotte would tell you I've always been better with books than people." Victoria's expression shifted, fractionally, imperceptibly to anyone who hadn't spent the last 12 hours studying her. But Eleanor saw it. The slight relaxation, the way the calculation behind Victoria's eyes smoothed out into something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. "She thinks I'm retreating," Eleanor thought. "She thinks I'm admitting defeat before the battle even starts." "Of course," Victoria said warmly. "It must be quite overwhelming. Being back here, I mean." Eleanor tilted her head just slightly. "Back?" she said as though confused. "I've never been to Waverly Estate before." A pause, brief, almost invisible. "Oh, forgive me," Victoria said smoothly. "I only meant a house like this can feel overwhelming when you arrive, for anyone." "Yes," Eleanor agreed pleasantly. "Though it's quite lovely. The library especially. I wandered in last night and couldn't sleep." "Have you read much of the collection? You know the estate so well." "Quite a bit, yes." Victoria's smile was doing the same thing it always did, reaching upward on her face, but never reaching her eyes. "I've spent many evenings in that library." "With the Duke?" The question landed softly, innocently, like a stone dropped into still water. Victoria's cup paused halfway to her lips. "Among others," she said. "We are old friends." "Of course." Eleanor set down her own cup and looked at her hands. "He seems—" She let the word sit there a moment, as though she was choosing carefully. "He seems unchanged. Or perhaps I am. It's difficult to know, isn't it, when you haven't seen someone in a very long time?" She looked up. "Do you find that people surprise you when you see them again?" Victoria looked at her steadily. "Sometimes," she said. "And sometimes you find that some things are simply better left in the past." Eleanor held her gaze for one beat. 2. "What a wise thing to say," she said gently. "You're right, of course." She stood, thanked her for the tea, and left. And as she walked out, she heard Victoria set her cup down on the saucer with just a fraction more force than necessary. There you are, Eleanor thought. There you are. She was barely 3 steps down the corridor when she nearly collided with Margaret Hargrove, who appeared around the corner with the precise timing of a woman who made it her business to appear at inconvenient moments. "Miss Whitmore." Margaret's voice was pleasant. Her eyes were not. "I hope to speak with you, privately." Eleanor stopped. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove." The older woman looked at her with the particular expression of someone who has decided to be politely brutal. "I'll be direct, as I find directness saves everyone a great deal of wasted time," Margaret said. "This wedding is enormously important to my son and to our family. I would hate to see any unresolved business, shall we say, complicate what should be a joyful occasion." "I share that hope entirely," Eleanor said. "Good. Then you understand that whatever history exists between you and the Duke is best left precisely where it belongs." Her gaze was flat and certain. "In the past, Mrs. Hargrove," Eleanor said, keeping her voice warm. "I came here for my sister, that is all." The woman studied her for a long moment. "See that it stays that way," she said, and moved on. Eleanor watched her go. How many people, she thought, are invested in keeping me away from him? She stood in the corridor for a moment, with her back very straight, and something cold and clear settling through her like river water. Too many, she answered herself. Far too many. She went to find Alexander. She found him in the stables, not because he needed to be there, she suspected, but because he needed to be somewhere that wasn't a room full of people watching him. He heard her footsteps and turned with the careful expression of a man who has been waiting for something without wanting to admit it. Margaret Hargrove just warned me to stay away from you, Eleanor said. Alexander's expression darkened. She had no right. She had every right from where she's standing. She's protecting her son's wedding. Eleanor leaned against the stable door. What I found interesting is how fast she moved. We spent 20 minutes in a sitting room together, Victoria and I. 20 minutes. And then Margaret materialized in the hallway. Alexander was quiet for a moment. You think Victoria said something to her? I think Victoria and Margaret have an arrangement, Eleanor said. Victoria has spent years making herself indispensable to this estate and to the Hargrove family. She is at every gathering. She manages small social emergencies before they become large ones. She is... Eleanor paused, working through it. She is the kind of person who makes herself necessary and then uses that necessity as currency. She wanted to be Duchess of Waverley. Alexander said low and flat. She decided she would be. Eleanor looked at him. There's a difference. One is a hope, the other is a plan. She straightened. How many times did people try to discourage you from pursuing a relationship with me 3 years ago? Before the letters stopped. Alexander's jaw worked. Several, he said. My solicitor, one of my cousins. There were comments made about... He stopped. About the appropriateness, Eleanor finished quietly. A duke and a woman without fortune or title. Yes. And Victoria? A pause. Victoria said almost nothing, he said slowly. Which was unusual because Victoria always had opinions about everything. He stopped, turned to look at Eleanor fully. She was very quiet that autumn. I remember thinking it strange at the time. Because she was busy, Eleanor said. The word landed between them like something heavy and final. Alexander ran a hand over his face. We still don't have proof, he said. I know. If we go to Thomas, if we say any of this without proof. I know, Alexander. He dropped his hand and looked at her, and in his face she could see 3 years of something that had no clean name, grief and guilt, and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been quietly wrong about something enormous, and is only just now beginning to understand the full shape of what it cost. I'm going to need your help, she said. Anything. She believed him. She would not tell him she believed him, but she believed him. Your correspondence, she said, the letters from that period, are there any that reference Victoria directly? Any that she might have read? Any that were sent when she was in the house? I'll need to look, then look tonight. And tomorrow I need you to be seen speaking to me, warmly, in a way that makes it clear to anyone watching that whatever I said to Victoria this afternoon about letting the past be the past, she met his eyes, was a lie. Alexander looked at her steadily. You want her to think you've changed your mind, he said. I want her to think she's losing something she decided was already hers, Eleanor said. And I want to watch what she does about it. A beat. Eleanor, he said carefully. I know what I'm doing. I was going to say, he continued, that it's exactly the kind of plan you would have made 3 years ago, and I would have fallen in love with it just as much then. She looked at him. He did not look away. She turned and walked back toward the house. She told herself the warmth in her chest was only the afternoon sun. She almost believed it. Dinner the second evening was an entirely different performance. Eleanor dressed with more care than the night before. Nothing extravagant. She was not trying to perform wealth she didn't have. But she wore the deep blue dress that she had always known suited her best, and she pinned her hair simply, and when she came into the dining room, she went directly to Alexander's side of the table and said something light and easy that made him laugh genuinely, the way only something real can make a person laugh. She felt Victoria's eyes land on her from across the room, like a hand on her shoulder. She did not look over. Through dinner, she and Alexander spoke the way old friends speak, finishing thoughts, catching references, leaning toward each other across the table without realizing it. Thomas watched them with an expression of quiet delight. Charlotte watched Eleanor with bright, careful eyes that said, I need you to explain everything to me later. Margaret Hargrove watched with no expression at all, And Victoria Ashford. Victoria cut her lamb into very precise, very small pieces, and smiled at everything anyone said to her directly, and did not once look at Eleanor for longer than a second. Which was, Eleanor had learned when Victoria was most dangerous. When she stopped looking, she was working. The first sign came after dinner. Eleanor stepped out of the dining room and heard from the small sitting room to the left voices. Two voices. One was Victoria's, one was Charlotte's. Eleanor stopped. "Mo, only telling you because I care about you," Victoria was saying, and her voice was soft and concerned in the way that can so easily be mistaken for kindness. "And because I feel I owe you honesty. Your sister's history with the Duke as well. There were things said at the time, not by me, by others, but the general feeling was that she had—" A pause, a careful breath. "Overstepped. Pursued a connection that created some discomfort. I'm sure she was simply lonely, and he was kind, but—" "That's not true," Charlotte said. Her voice was quiet, but flat. "I'm not saying it's her fault," Victoria continued. "Only that her being here at his home just before your wedding, it places the Duke in a very—" "My sister," Charlotte said, and her voice had changed, "is the most honest person I have ever known. And if you have something to say about her, you should say it to her face." Silence. Eleanor stood in the hallway with her hand pressed flat against the wall. She had not expected Charlotte to say that. She did not know why she was surprised. "I only meant," Victoria began. "I heard what you meant," Charlotte said clearly. "And I think we should go back and join the others." Eleanor moved away from the door before they emerged. She was halfway up the staircase when she heard Charlotte's footsteps behind her. "Eleanor," she turned. Charlotte was looking up at her from the bottom of the stairs with her jaw set in the precise expression she'd worn since childhood when she'd made up her mind about something. "What did she do?" Charlotte said. Eleanor came back down 2 steps, slowly. "What makes you think she did anything?" "Because she was asking me to doubt you," in a voice that pretended to be worried and wasn't. Charlotte's eyes were sharp. "And because you've had a look on your face since the moment you arrived here that you only get when you're trying to solve something. I've known that look since I was 8 years old." A beat. "Tell me." Eleanor looked at her sister. She made the decision. "Come upstairs," she said, "and close the door behind you." Charlotte listened without interrupting. That was a gift Eleanor had never taken for granted, in her sister, the ability to sit still and take in difficult information without making it about her own shock. When Eleanor finished, Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance. "She forged the letters," Charlotte said. "We believe so. We don't have proof yet." "She destroyed 3 years of your life." "Yes. And she's downstairs right now at the table at my wedding." Charlotte's voice caught, then steadied. "Because she's Thomas's oldest friend." "Yes." Charlotte stood up and walked to the window and stood with her back to Eleanor for a moment. "Does Thomas know?" she asked. "No." "You can't tell him without proof?" "No." "And we have 4 days." 3.5, Eleanor said. "The ceremony is Saturday morning." Charlotte turned around. Her face was still. Not the way Eleanor's face went, still not with suppression and control. Charlotte's stillness came from somewhere deeper, from the place where love that has been threatened becomes very quiet and very determined. "Then we find the proof," Charlotte said. "What do you need me to do?" Eleanor looked at her sister, and for the first time since the carriage had pulled up to that stone-stepped entrance, the tightness in Eleanor's chest loosened fractionally briefly into something that felt almost like hope. "I need you to stay close to her," Eleanor said. "Not confrontationally, warmly, as if nothing has happened. Can you do that?" Charlotte was quiet for 1 second. "I grew up managing Mama's temper and Papa's pride, and your stubbornness," she said dryly. "I can manage Victoria Ashford." Eleanor almost laughed. She caught it, but only barely. She crossed the room and pulled her sister into a hug that she had not known she needed until she was already in it. "I'm sorry," she said against Charlotte's hair. I'm sorry this came into your week. Charlotte's arms tightened. Don't you dare apologize, she said fiercely. She did this, not you. She pulled back and held Eleanor by the shoulders and looked at her with clear, certain eyes. We're going to fix it, Charlotte said. And then we're going to have the most beautiful wedding anyone in this county has ever seen. Yes, yes, Eleanor said. The next morning, Alexander came to find her early, before breakfast, before anyone else had gathered. He came quietly, and he handed her a small stack of letters without preamble, and the look on his face told her he had found something. 3 letters from that autumn, he said, written on days when Victoria was in residence. Look at the envelopes. She looked. The seals on 2 of the envelopes had been broken and repressed. Not perfectly close, but not perfectly. The wax was slightly thicker on one edge, the impression just fractionally misaligned. Someone had opened these letters, read them, and tried to reseal them. Eleanor turned the envelope in her hands. She read our correspondence, she said. She knew exactly what we were writing to each other. That's how she was able to replicate the voice, the phrases. She set the envelope down. This is something. This is not proof on its own, but it's something. There's more, Alexander said. She looked up. He handed her a small piece of paper, a bill of sale creased with age for correspondence paper, purchased from a stationer in Charlottesville. His name was on it. The date was 3 years prior. I didn't purchase this, he said. I use a different stationer. I've used the same one for 12 years. He met Eleanor's eyes. Someone purchased this paper in my name, and the stationer I traced it to his shop is 3 streets from the Ashford family home in Charlottesville. The air in the room sharpened. She purchased paper to match mine, Eleanor said, and had it charged to a false account in my name, so if anyone ever traced the purchase, it would point to you. Eleanor looked at the bill of sale, then at Alexander. She planned this so that if it ever unraveled, the trail would lead somewhere other than her. She set the paper down. For a moment she stood with both palms flat on the desk, and she let herself feel briefly fully without swallowing it the exact weight of what had been done to them. Not just the lost years, not just the grief, but the precision of it, the cruelty of someone sitting down and constructing a lie with that much care. She took one breath. Then she picked up the bill of sale. We need one more thing, she said. Something she wrote herself. A personal letter, a note, anything in her own handwriting. I want to put it next to the forged letter, and I want an expert to confirm what I already know. Alexander nodded. I can arrange that by tomorrow. Then by tomorrow evening, Eleanor said. We will have what we need. She gathered the letters, folded the bill of sale carefully, and set them in the small case she'd brought from her room. She clicked the case shut. There's something else, she said, and her voice had changed, become quieter. Something I've been thinking about since last night. She looked at Alexander. She didn't just want to separate us. She could have done that more simply. She could have spread rumors, whispered in the right ears. She paused. But she took the time to forge letters in our voices, to let us both believe we were rejected, not just separated, rejected by the person we loved. Alexander said nothing. She wanted us to doubt ourselves, Eleanor said. She wanted you to believe I didn't want you. She wanted me to believe I wasn't worth staying for. She chose those particular wounds deliberately. The silence between them was very heavy. She knew us well enough, Alexander said finally, and the words came out rough, like they cost him something, to know exactly where we'd break. Yes, Eleanor said. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. That 3 years ago, a woman who knew their fears had used those fears like keys and unlocked the worst possible outcome, and that they were both still standing here, alive, in the same room, with every letter they had written each other still existing somewhere in the world. Tomorrow evening, she said again, steadier now. Tomorrow evening, he agreed. She turned toward the door. Eleanor. She stopped. Last night, he said, When you made me laugh at dinner, I don't think I've laughed like that in 3 years." She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around. "Get the handwriting analysis," she said, "and then we'll talk." She walked out. Down the hallway, she passed the sitting room. Through the half-open door, she caught a glimpse of Victoria standing at the window alone, very still, staring out at the gardens, with an expression on her face that was nothing like the smile she wore in company. Eleanor paused. Just for a second. Victoria did not turn, but the set of her shoulders, the tension in the line of her jaw. It was the posture of a woman who has spent years building something very carefully and can feel in the way animals feel. Whether before it arrives that something is coming. Something she cannot stop. Eleanor walked on. 3 days until the wedding, and the reckoning was nearly ready. The handwriting analyst arrived at Waverley Estate the following morning under the guise of a document clerk assisting with the wedding contracts. Alexander had arranged it overnight with the kind of quiet efficiency Eleanor had forgotten he possessed the ability to make difficult things happen without drawing attention to the fact that he was making them happen at all. His name was Mr. Calder. 60 years old, wire-rimmed spectacles, the careful hands of a man who had spent his life looking at small, important details. He sat in Alexander's study with both letters in front of him, the forged one, and a genuine letter Eleanor had written 3 years prior, and he did not speak for 7 full minutes. Eleanor stood by the door. Alexander stood by the window. Neither of them moved. Mr. Calder finally set down his glass and looked up. "The letters were written by 2 different people," he said simply. "The forged letter copies the style with considerable skill. Whoever did this studied the genuine handwriting carefully. But there are 3 consistent deviations. The pressure on descending letters is heavier in the forgery. The spacing between words narrows at the ends of sentences in a way the genuine writer never does. And the letter R." He pointed to a line in the forged letter. "The genuine writer lifts the pen on the downstroke. The forger does not. It is a small thing, but it is consistent across every R in this document." Eleanor looked at Alexander. Alexander looked at the letters. "Is that sufficient?" he said. "As evidence, if it came to a formal setting." "It's sufficient to establish reasonable doubt that this letter was written by the named party," Mr. Calder said. "A second analysis would strengthen the position, but yes, it is a professional determination." "Thank you," Eleanor said. After Mr. Calder was escorted out, the study was very quiet. Alexander sat down in the chair behind the desk for the first time since they had begun this, as if his legs had simply decided they were done, holding him up. He pressed both hands flat on the desk and stared at the 2 letters lying side by side. "It's confirmed," he said. "It's confirmed," Eleanor said. Neither of them celebrated, because confirmation was not the end. It was the beginning of the part they had both been quietly dreading. The part where they had to decide what to do with the truth now that they had it. 2 days before Charlotte's wedding, in a house full of guests, with Thomas's oldest friendship about to be named as the thing that had broken 2 people's lives. "We need to tell Thomas," Alexander said. "Yes." "He's not going to want to believe it." "No. He's known Victoria since they were children." "I know." Eleanor came and sat in the chair across from him. "But he's marrying my sister, and she deserves a marriage that doesn't begin on a secret." She met Alexander's eyes. "And so does he." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "We tell him tonight," he said, "privately, before dinner. He needs time to sit with it before he has to face her across a table." "Agreed." A pause. "How do we show him?" Alexander said, without it sounding like 2 people who want to believe the worst about someone he loves. Eleanor picked up the bill of sale for the correspondence paper. She picked up Mr. Calder's written assessment, which he had produced in a brief paragraph before leaving. She set them beside the broken seal envelopes Alexander had found the night before. "We show him the evidence," she said, "and we let him draw his own conclusion. We don't accuse, we don't demand. We show him the facts, and we give him the respect of trusting his judgment." Alexander looked at the small pile of documents. "He's a good man," he said. "I know. This is going to hurt him." "I know that too," Eleanor said. "But the alternative is letting it hurt him later when the damage is worse." He looked up at her, and something in his face, something careful and long-restrained, broke open for just a second, the way ice cracks in early spring, not shattering, but giving way. "How are you so steady?" he said. "After everything that's been done to you, how are you still this steady?" Eleanor held his gaze. "I'm not steady," she said honestly. "I'm furious. But fury and steadiness can live in the same body if you give them clear enough direction." He stared at her. She stood and gathered the documents. "Tonight," she said, "before dinner, find Thomas." She walked out before he could say another word. Thomas Hargrove listened to everything without interrupting. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed, that he had the same quality Charlotte had, that stillness under pressure, that ability to hold difficult information without immediately trying to push it away. She liked him for it, even as she watched his face move through discomfort and confusion, and the slow, unwilling progress towards something he didn't want to reach. He sat with his hands on his knees in Alexander's study, with the three of them himself, Alexander and Eleanor, and he looked at the documents she laid out one by one, and he read the analyst's assessment twice. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. "The seal on the envelope," he said finally. "Yes." That could have been damaged in transit." "It could have," Eleanor said gently. "Yes." "And the paper purchase could be a coincidence." "It could be." Thomas looked at the analyst's report again. His jaw tightened. "But the handwriting isn't a coincidence," he said. "No," Eleanor said. "It isn't." He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to them, the way people do when they need a moment to be somewhere no one can see their face. "She was here that autumn," he said. "I remember. She stayed 3 weeks. It was longer than usual. I thought it was because she enjoyed the season." Alexander said nothing. "She told me once." Thomas stopped, started again. "Years ago she said something about this house, about how it was the only place that felt like it could be a real home to her. I thought she meant it sentimentally." He turned around. His face was composed, but only with effort. "She meant something else." "Thomas," Alexander said quietly, "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry yet." Thomas's voice was firm. "Where is she now?" "She went out for a walk after lunch," Eleanor said. "Charlotte is with her." Something moved across Thomas's face. Charlotte knows everything," Eleanor said. "She's known since the second night. She chose to help." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Your sister," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a man who has just understood more fully than he had before exactly who he was marrying. "My sister," Eleanor agreed. He turned to Alexander. "I want to speak to Victoria myself," he said. "Tonight, before dinner, alone." "Thomas?" "She has been my friend since I was 9 years old," he said, and his voice was quiet and absolute. "I owe her the chance to tell me the truth to my face. If she takes it, we deal with it honestly. If she doesn't—" He paused, steadied himself. "Then we'll know." Alexander looked at Eleanor. Eleanor gave a small nod. "All right," Alexander said, "but not alone. Eleanor should be there." Thomas looked at her. "Will you do that?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I'll be there." They found Victoria in the small sitting room off the East Hall, returned from her walk arranging flowers in a vase, with the concentrated attention of a woman performing calm rather than feeling it. She looked up when Thomas came in, and her face opened into its warmest smile. Then she saw Eleanor behind him. The smile stayed, but something behind it closed. "Thomas!" Her voice was easy. "I thought we were gathering for dinner soon." "We have time," Thomas said. He came and sat down across from her. His voice was gentle. It was, Eleanor thought, the gentleness of a man who has loved someone for a long time and is hoping with every remaining fraction of that love to be proven wrong. "I need to ask you something, Victoria, and I need you to be honest with me." Victoria set down the flower in her hand. "Of course," she said. Thomas glanced at Eleanor. Eleanor placed the forged letter on the table between them. Victoria looked at it. Not long. Not with the confusion of someone seeing it for the first time. A single second of recognition there and gone before she arranged her expression into something puzzled. "What is this?" "A letter that was sent to Alexander 3 years ago," Eleanor said. "In my name, ending our correspondence." "I don't understand what this has to do with—" "Did you write it?" Thomas said. Silence. Victoria looked at Thomas. Not at the letter. Not at Eleanor. At Thomas. And in the space between that look and whatever she was about to say, Eleanor saw something extraordinary happen. The managed surface of Victoria Ashford, the smile, the warmth, the careful social architecture she had built and maintained for years, shifted. Not collapsed, not broken, but shifted the way a mask shifts when the face beneath it is working too hard. "Thomas," she said, and her voice had changed to softer, more direct, stripped of its social polish, in a way that was almost convincing. "You've known me my entire life." "That's not an answer," he said. Her eyes moved to Eleanor. And Eleanor understood in that look that what was being decided in this moment had nothing to do with her. Victoria was calculating something, not whether to confess, whether she could still win. Eleanor came back here hoping to reclaim something she lost, Victoria said, and her voice was gentle and certain, the voice of a reasonable woman sharing an uncomfortable truth. She arrived the moment Alexander was in a position to offer her a title and a fortune, and you are both interpreting coincidence as conspiracy because— "Stop," Thomas said. Victoria stopped. "Look at me," he said. "Not her, me." His voice was still quiet, still kind, still the voice of a man who loved her as his oldest friend. "Did you write that letter?" A long beat. Victoria's chin lifted. "I did what was necessary," she said. The room went absolutely still. Even Eleanor, who had known, felt the words land in her chest like something physical. Thomas sat back slowly, as if he'd taken a blow he'd seen coming and had still not been quite ready for. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means—" Victoria's voice held, but only barely. "It means I was the only person in that room in that season who could see clearly." He was throwing himself away. A duke, this family, this estate, this history over a woman with no fortune, no connections, no place in his world. I was protecting him. "You were protecting yourself," Eleanor said. Victoria's eyes cut to her. "You wanted this house," Eleanor said, not with anger, with clarity. "You wanted this life, and the only thing standing between you and it was the fact that he didn't want you. He wanted me." She paused. One breath. "And that you could not accept." "You don't know anything about—" "I know about the paper," Eleanor said. "I know you purchased correspondence paper in Charlottesville to match mine, charged to a false account in Alexander's name. I know you broke the seal on at least 2 of his letters before resealing them. I know you spent 3 weeks here that autumn, longer than any other visit, managing a deception you had been planning long enough to prepare for." She set the bill of sale on the table beside the letter. "I know all of it, Victoria." The color in Victoria's face changed. She looked at Thomas. "Thomas, don't." His voice was the quietest Eleanor had heard it. "Please don't say my name right now." Victoria's composure fractured. Not all at once, but visibly. Like watching something carefully constructed meet a force it was not built for. "I thought—" Her voice was different now, stripped. "I thought after enough time he would see. I thought if she was simply gone, if there was distance between them, he would understand that what I could offer him was—" "Did you think about her?" Thomas said. "What you did to her?" Victoria was silent. 3 years, he said. She spent 3 years believing the man she loved had rejected her with 4 sentences. Did you think about what that does to a person? I thought about what she would have done to this family, Victoria said, and now there was something raw in her voice, something that was neither guilt nor remorse, but something closer to the naked conviction of a person who had told themselves a story so many times it had become the only truth they knew. She had nothing to offer. She would have been a liability to everything he— That was not your decision to make, Eleanor said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room like something precise and final. Victoria looked at her, and for the first time since Eleanor had arrived at Waverley Estate, she saw in Victoria Ashford's eyes something that was not calculation or management or the steady assessment of a player watching the board. She saw something that looked briefly and painfully like the recognition that she had lost. Not the argument, not the confrontation, everything. Thomas stood up. He did not speak to Victoria again. He looked at Eleanor and said quietly, "Thank you for telling me the truth." And then he walked out. The door closed behind him. The silence in the room after he left was unlike any other silence Eleanor had sat inside. Victoria remained in her chair very still, the flowers she had been arranging lying on the table like something forgotten. And Eleanor remained standing across from her, and neither of them spoke for what felt like a full minute. Then Victoria said very quietly, "Are you going to tell everyone?" "That's not my choice to make," Eleanor said. "It's Thomas's. He'll tell Charlotte." "Yes." "And she'll tell." "Yes," Eleanor said. "People will know." Victoria looked down at her hands. "I thought I was doing what made sense," she said. And her voice had lost every layer of management, every layer of performance, and what was left underneath was something Eleanor had not expected to find. Not a villain's satisfaction, not a predator's cold certainty, but something far more ordinary and far more sad. The voice of a woman who had wanted something desperately and had made the worst possible decision about how to reach it, and had been living inside that decision ever since. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "I believe you thought that," she said. "I believe every word of it made sense to you." A pause. "That doesn't make it less of a lie, and it doesn't give back what was taken." Victoria said nothing. Eleanor picked up the documents from the table. "The wedding is in 2 days," she said. "What happens after that is between you and Thomas, and between you and Alexander, and eventually between you and whatever you decide you owe to the truth." She paused at the door. "But I want you to understand something, Victoria. I did not come back here for a title. I did not come back here for this estate. I came back here because my sister asked me to stand beside her on the most important day of her life." She looked at her steadily. "You built your plan on the assumption that I was after the same thing you were. That was your first mistake. And it was the one that undid everything else." She walked out. The hallway was empty. She stood in it for a moment with her eyes closed and her back against the wall, and she breathed long and slow through the thing that was moving through her. Not triumph, not relief, not the clean satisfaction she had imagined feeling when the truth finally came out. Something more complicated than any of those. Something that felt like the moment after a wound is cleaned necessary, and right, and still undeniably painful. Alexander found her there. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her, and he read her face with the quick accuracy of a man who had once made it his business to pay attention to this particular woman. "It's done," he said. "It's done." He came and stood beside her. Not close, but present. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "That's all right." Thomas. In his room. Charlotte went up to him. A pause. She didn't ask questions first. She just went. Eleanor felt the tightness in her chest ease fractionally. "Good," she said. They stood in the hallway side by side, and neither of them spoke, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who have just come through something together and have not yet decided what to do with the fact that they are still standing. Then, from somewhere above them, they heard a sound. A door opening. Footsteps. And then Charlotte's voice carrying clearly down the staircase. "Victoria, I think you should pack tonight." Another door. Silence. Alexander turned to look at Eleanor. Eleanor turned to look at him. And then, because 3 years of grief had just cracked open in the space of one afternoon, and the truth had finally been said out loud, and her sister was upstairs handling the aftermath with the steady precision of a woman who knew exactly what her marriage deserved to begin with. Eleanor Whitmore laughed. Not performance. Not relief. Real laughter, brief and sudden and slightly disbelieving, the kind that comes when something has been so heavy for so long that the moment it lifts, the body doesn't know what to do with the lightness. Alexander started to smile. "Don't," she said, still laughing. "I'm not doing anything." "You're about to say something." "I was going to say," he said, and now he was laughing too quiet and real, "that your sister is significantly more terrifying than I remembered." "She always was," Eleanor said. "We just never gave her a reason before." The laughter faded. They were facing each other now in the empty hallway, and the ease between them, that old familiar ease that had once lived in morning letters and evening libraries and the particular comfort of being understood, was right there, undeniable and complicated and entirely too present to pretend it wasn't. Alexander's expression changed. Became careful. Honest. The way his face had always gone when he was about to say something that cost him. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say all of it before you respond." She waited. "I know what we've found this week does not fix 3 years," he said. "I know that knowing the truth of what happened does not give back the time or the grief or the things you built alone that you should not have had to build alone. I am not standing here asking you to forget any of that." He paused. "But I am standing here asking you not tonight, not before you're ready, only asking you to consider the possibility that what I feel for you did not disappear because you were absent, that it has been here the entire time quietly, without any right to be waiting for a moment, exactly like this one." Eleanor looked at him. She said nothing for a long time. "That's a great deal to ask," she said finally. "I know. We barely have 2 days before a wedding and a house full of people and whatever Thomas decides to do about, I know. And I am not the woman I was 3 years ago. I'm not going to pretend I am. I don't want the woman you were 3 years ago," he said. "I want the woman who just walked into that room and told the truth and walked back out without a single moment of cruelty when cruelty would have been completely justified." She looked at him. "That's a very good answer," she said. "Thank you." "I didn't say it was good enough." "I know that too." She turned toward the staircase. 2 days, she said. "My sister is getting married. That is what happens in the next 2 days." She set one hand on the banister. "After that..." She paused, didn't turn. "We'll talk." She went upstairs. Behind her she heard him exhale slowly. And she thought that a man who exhales like that, not frustrated, not resigned, but like someone who has been holding his breath and finally let it go, might just be exactly what he says he is. Someone who has been waiting. She reached the top of the stairs and found Charlotte's door slightly open, and Charlotte sitting on the edge of her bed, still dressed for the evening, with her hands folded in her lap, and her composure intact, and her eyes just slightly too bright. Eleanor went in and sat beside her and took her hand. "Thomas," she said quietly. "He's sad," Charlotte said. "He's not angry yet. He will be. But right now he's just sad. 19 years of friendship is a long time to discover was built on someone else's need." She paused. "He said he wants to sleep and think, and that tomorrow he'll know what he wants to do. That's wise. He's a wise person." Charlotte said it simply with the particular certainty of someone who has seen a person at their hardest moment and found them solid. "That's why I'm marrying him." They sat together quietly. "Are we still having a wedding?" Eleanor asked. Charlotte looked at her sideways. "Eleanor," she said perfectly dry, "I have waited my entire adult life for a good man to ask me to marry him in a house full of roses. Victoria Ashford is not going to take that from me. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Saturday morning, Charlotte said. Same as planned? And you are going to stand right beside me, and you are going to wear the blue dress, because it's the best thing you own, and after the ceremony, you are going to deal with whatever you and Alexander need to deal with. You noticed. I noticed at dinner the first night, Charlotte said serenely. I noticed at breakfast the second morning. I noticed in the library when Mrs. Crewe told me she'd seen you both in there past midnight. She paused. Eleanor, I love you, but you are not as subtle as you think you are. Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it. The blue dress, Charlotte said firmly. Saturday morning, and somewhere down the corridor, in a room that was already half-packed, Victoria Ashford sat on the edge of her bed and finally understood with a clarity that had come too late and cost too much that wanting something badly enough to destroy other people to reach it had not brought her closer to the life she wanted. It had only guaranteed she would spend it watching someone else live there instead. The night before Charlotte's wedding, the house was quiet in a way that felt earned. Thomas had come down to dinner and spoken to everyone with the composed warmth of a man who had made his decision and was at peace with it. He had not spoken to Victoria, who was not at dinner, whose absence was noted and not discussed. He had sat beside Charlotte and held her hand on the table with the uncomplicated ease of two people who have already passed their hardest test and come out holding on. Margaret Hargrove had said nothing, but after dinner in the hallway, she had stopped Eleanor. Eleanor had turned to meet whatever was coming. I owe you an apology, Margaret said. I was unkind earlier in the week. I made assumptions about your reasons for being here that were... She paused. Inaccurate. They were reasonable assumptions, Eleanor said. They were convenient ones. Margaret corrected herself with the precision of a woman who has spent her life saying exactly what she means. Which is worse? A pause. You handled an extremely difficult situation with a great deal of grace. I handled it with a great deal of stubbornness, Eleanor said. Something shifted in the older woman's face. Perhaps, Margaret said, in this particular family, those are the same thing. She walked on. Eleanor stood in the hallway for a moment and thought that being accepted by difficult people was frequently more exhausting than being opposed by them. Then she went to bed, and she slept. Properly, completely for the first time since the carriage door had opened onto those stone steps, and she had seen his face. Tomorrow her sister was getting married. Tomorrow something that had been broken for 3 years would finally have room to breathe. Tomorrow Eleanor Whitmore would put on the blue dress and stand in the sunlight beside the person she loved most in the world. And then after that, she would deal with everything else. One impossible, necessary, terrifying thing at a time. Charlotte's wedding morning arrived the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without fanfare, as though the day had decided to be beautiful without making a production of it. Eleanor was dressed before anyone came to her door. The blue dress. Charlotte had said it, and she had meant it, and Eleanor had not argued, because Charlotte was getting married today, and on the day your sister gets married, you wear the blue dress and you do not make it about yourself. She sat on the edge of her bed in the early quiet and held both her own hands in her lap and did something she had not allowed herself to do since the carriage had pulled up to this estate 5 days ago. She thought about all of it. Not the investigation, not the documents, not Victoria's fractured composure, or Margaret's stiff apology, or Thomas's quiet, dignified grief. She thought about the thing underneath all of that. The thing she had been managing and directing and keeping at a controlled distance since the moment she had looked up and seen Alexander Waverley standing on those steps. She thought about what it had felt like to walk into that library and find him already there. She thought about 37 morning letters. She thought about the way her name sounded in his mouth, Eleanor, like something he had been carrying and finally set down. She thought about what he had said in the hallway last night. What I feel for you did not disappear because you were absent. It has been here the entire time quietly without any right to be. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she stood up, smoothed the blue dress with flat, deliberate hands, and went to help her sister get ready for her wedding. Charlotte's room was already warm with the particular energy of a bride 2 hours from her ceremony, half joy, half something that lives just below joy. The awareness that your life is about to change irrevocably, and the decision to walk toward it anyway. The lady's maid was working on Charlotte's hair. Charlotte was sitting very still in the way she did when she was trying to appear calm and succeeding only moderately. "You look beautiful," Eleanor said from the doorway. Charlotte met her eyes in the mirror. "I'm shaking," Charlotte said. "I know. My hands won't stop." "They will once you see him," Eleanor said. "They always stop when you see the right person." Charlotte looked at her in the mirror for a moment too long to be about the wedding dress. "Eleanor," she said. "Not today," Eleanor said gently. "Today is yours." Charlotte looked back at the mirror. The lady's maid worked in silence. "He asked me last night," Charlotte said quietly, "if I was certain, given everything that happened this week. He actually said that if I needed more time, he would wait, that the wedding could be postponed and he would not hold it against me." She paused. "He asked if I was certain." "What did you say?" "I said I had never been more certain of anything in my life." Charlotte's reflection was steady now, decided. "And that any man who offers to wait when he doesn't have to is exactly the kind of man I want to stop waiting for." Eleanor smiled. "He's a good man," she said. "He's the best one I've found," Charlotte said. "And I looked." Eleanor crossed the room and stood behind her sister and met her eyes in the mirror and did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say. She just put both hands on Charlotte's shoulders lightly, the way you hold something you are proud of and grateful for, and would not trade for any other version of the world. Charlotte reached up and covered one of Eleanor's hands with her own. They stayed like that for a moment. Then Charlotte said briskly, and with perfect Charlotte timing, "Now fix my left pin because it's crooked, and I cannot get married with a crooked pin." Eleanor fixed the pin. The ceremony was held in the estate chapel, small, filled with morning light through the windows. Roses arranged by Charlotte herself the evening before, because she had needed something to do with her hands, and decoration had seemed more useful than pacing. The guests were not numerous family close friends. The people Thomas and Charlotte had chosen carefully rather than collected out of obligation. Eleanor stood at Charlotte's right side, and Thomas stood at Alexander's left. And when Thomas saw Charlotte come through the door, his face did the thing that good men's faces do. It simply went open. No performance. No composed dignity. Just a man seeing the person he loved walking toward him, and not caring who saw how that felt. Charlotte saw his face. Her hands stopped shaking. Eleanor had known they would. The ceremony was brief and true. The minister was a local man who had known both families for decades and spoke without flourish about the particular quality of love that chooses daily, that does not rely on feeling alone, but on decision, on the repeated act of turning toward another person, even when it is inconvenient or frightening or hard. Eleanor listened to every word. She was aware without looking that Alexander was across the aisle from her. She was aware of the precise distance between them in a way that had nothing to do with measurement and everything to do with the fact that her body had always known where he was in a room. She did not look at him during the ceremony. She looked at her sister. Charlotte Whitmore married Thomas Hargrove with steady hands and clear eyes and a smile that was not performed for the room, but was simply helplessly entirely real. And Thomas said his vows in a voice that did not waver once. And when the minister pronounced them married, he took Charlotte's face in both his hands and kissed her with the reverence of a man who understands what he has been given. The room was very quiet for a moment after. Then Charlotte laughed bright and free and entirely herself, and the quiet broke into warmth, and the guests moved, and Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest that she had not even known was still clenched. It was done. Her sister was married. The morning was over before Eleanor had a plan for the afternoon, and the reception filled the main rooms with the comfortable noise of people who are genuinely happy for the couple they have gathered to celebrate. Eleanor moved through it all with the ease of someone who has decided to be present rather than managed. She talked to Thomas's cousins. She danced once with a cheerful elderly gentleman who told her 3 contradictory stories about how he had met Thomas's father. She ate food that was better than anything she had eaten all week, because grief suppresses appetite and resolution apparently restores it. She did not see Alexander until the reception had been going for nearly an hour. He appeared at her elbow while she was standing at the edge of the room watching Charlotte and Thomas dance. And he did not announce himself. He simply stood beside her in the easy way they had been standing beside each other in various rooms of this house for 5 days now, and she knew he was there the moment he arrived. "They're well matched," he said. "Extraordinarily," she agreed. "Thomas told me this morning before the ceremony that Charlotte came to him last night after he'd gone to his room, not to reassure him, not to check on him. She brought him a cup of tea and sat with him in silence for an hour, and then said, 'I love you, good night,' and left." Eleanor smiled. "That's Charlotte entirely." He said it was the moment he understood what his life was going to be like. A pause. "I think he meant that as the highest compliment." "It is." They watched the dancing for a moment. Then Alexander said quietly, "Margaret has spoken to the solicitor." Eleanor turned slightly. "About Victoria," she said. "About the correspondence paper and the false account charged in my name. It constitutes fraud. The solicitor says there are grounds." He paused. "But Thomas has asked that no formal action be pursued." Thomas asked that. He said he did not want the next 20 years of his marriage to involve a legal proceeding against his oldest childhood friend. He said he wanted it to be over. Alexander looked at her. He asked that she be quietly informed that she is no longer welcome at Waverley Estate, or at any gathering associated with either family. Eleanor absorbed that. "That's a dignified decision," she said. "It's a Thomas decision," Alexander said. "Which is the same thing." Eleanor looked back at the dancing. Charlotte was laughing at something Thomas had said, her head tilted back entirely unguarded and entirely happy. And Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude so complete it was almost overwhelming that her sister was here, that this had happened, that the week had come to this instead of something darker. "I keep thinking," she said, and she had not planned to say it, about how different this could have been. If we hadn't found the letters, if Thomas hadn't believed us, if Charlotte had been kept in the dark and found out later. "But that isn't what happened," Alexander said. "I know." Eleanor. He said it the way he had been saying it all week, like the word itself was something he had been waiting to use. "Can we walk?" She looked at him. "The reception is going to continue very happily without us for 20 minutes. She considered him. 20 minutes, she said. He led her through the side door and into the garden, and this time, standing in the place where he had once told her he loved her for the first time, where she had once believed a future was possible, Eleanor did not look away. She had spent 5 days in this house, and she had earned the right to stand in this garden without flinching. He stopped, turned to face her, and said nothing for a moment, which she had learned over the course of this week was what he did when the thing he needed to say was something he had been carrying long enough that getting it out required more care than usual. "I've been thinking about what I said last night," he started. "Alexander, please, quietly, let me." She waited. "I told you that what I feel for you has been here the entire time," he said. "And that's true. But I've been sitting with it since last night, and I realize that's not sufficient. That's not an accounting. It's a statement, and you deserve more than a statement." He looked at her directly. "I made a mistake 3 years ago that I cannot fix. I received a letter that claimed to be from you, and I was hurt, and my pride told me that if you wanted to end it, then I would not beg, and I did not go to find you. I told myself it was respect for your decision." He paused. "It was cowardice. I was afraid you had looked clearly at the gap between our worlds and decided it was too wide. I was afraid that what Victoria's letter said was something you had thought but been too kind to say yourself." Eleanor was very still. "I let my fear make the decision for me," he said. "And I spent 3 years being wrong. And I need you to know that I know that. Not because it changes what happened, but because you have a right to know that I understand exactly what I did and what it cost." She looked at him for a long time. "You should have come," she said. "Yes, even if the letter had been real, even if I had written it, you should have come and looked me in the face and asked me if I meant it." "Yes," he said. "I know. Because I would have told you." Her voice caught just slightly, just for a second, and she let it, because they were in this garden, and she had earned the right to that too. "I would have told you that I had never wanted you to stop." The words landed between them. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his face was entirely unguarded in a way she had not seen it before. Not in the study, not in the library, not across a dozen charged dinner tables. Stripped of the careful composure he wore like a second coat. "I know," he said. And the two words held 3 years, and every morning letter, and every wrong decision he had made after the last real one. "I'm not ready to forgive you," Eleanor said. "Not fully, not yet. I want to be honest about that." "I know that too. I'm not the woman who left 3 years ago. She was braver in some ways and less resilient in others, and she had not yet learned what she was capable of doing alone." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "The woman standing here now does not need a duke. She does not need an estate, or a title, or anyone to complete her. She has built herself from scratch once and she knows she can do it again." "Yes," he said. "So if I choose this, if I choose you, it won't be because I need you." She paused. "It will be because I want to. Because I look at you, and I see the man who wrote me 37 morning letters and meant every word of every one. And I find that I am not willing to let someone else's lie determine what that means." Alexander looked at her. He did not smile. He did not reach for her. He simply said, "Tell me what you need." And that those 4 words, quiet and unhurried with no promise that the answer would be easy or fast or comfortable, were the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 3 years. "Time," she said. "Not endless time, not a test. Just time to trust it again. Time to make sure that what I feel is real and not just the relief of understanding what happened." "I have time," he said. "And I need you to not pressure me," she said. "No grand gestures, no urgent declarations, no making it dramatic." "Understood. And I need—" She stopped, looked at him. "I need you to write to me. Not every day, not obligatorily. But when you have something real to say, write it, the way you used to." Something moved across his face. "You kept the letters," he said. She had burned them. She had stood in front of the iron stove in her bedroom and fed every one of them into the fire. "No," she said. "I burned them." He absorbed that. "But I remember them," she said. "Everyone. So when you write, you'll have to be better this time. Because I'll know if you're reaching." He almost smiled. "That is a terrifying standard," he said. "You said it yourself," she said. "You write very well when you mean it." "I always meant it." "I know," she said. "That's why the bar is where it is." She turned back toward the house. Behind her he said, "Eleanor." She stopped. "For what it's worth," he said. "Every morning for 3 years I still thought about what I would have written." She stood with her back to him, and the garden around her, and the sound of the reception drifting from the house, and she felt that settle into her chest like something coming to rest after a very long journey. "Write it down next time," she said, and she walked back inside. The afternoon deepened around the celebration, and Eleanor moved through it differently than she had moved through any moment of the past 5 days. Not performing calm, not managing distance. Just present genuinely and completely in the way that becomes possible when the thing you have been bracing for has finally arrived and been survived. Thomas found her between the dancing and the toasting standing near the door, with a glass of something she was not actually drinking. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Eleanor." She turned. He looked, she thought, exactly like a man who has walked through a painful week and come out the other side, not unscathed, but intact. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there on the first evening. His smile was real, but quieter than it had been. He was someone who had learned something hard about trust and was still deciding how to carry it. "I owe you a great deal," he said. "You owe me nothing. You protected my marriage before it began," he said firmly. "I would rather have known this than discovered it later. No matter how," he paused, "no matter how it felt to know it." "How are you?" she asked because she meant it. He considered the question honestly, which she respected. "I'm sad," he said. "I expect I'll be sad about it for a while. 19 years is—" He shook his head slightly. "You don't just stop caring about a person because you discover they were capable of something like this. I find I still care. I just can't trust it anymore, and that is its own kind of grief." "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "It is." He looked at her with the recognition that passed between them. Two people who understood from their own separate experiences what it felt like to grieve a relationship that had been built on someone else's dishonesty. "Charlotte told me," he said, "that you spent 3 years believing you had been rejected." "Yes." "And you came here anyway, for her." "She's my sister." Thomas shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, but in the particular way of someone encountering a quality they genuinely admire. "Alexander is a lucky man," he said, "if he's wise enough to know it." "That remains to be evaluated," Eleanor said. Thomas laughed real laughter, the first she'd heard from him all week, that reached his eyes. "He's been wise enough about everything else I've known him for," he said. "I think he'll manage." He raised his glass to her. She raised hers. They drank. Later, much later, when the toasts had been given and the cake had been cut, and Charlotte had danced until her feet hurt and declared it the best day of her entire life, with the absolute confidence of a woman who means it, Eleanor found a quiet corner and sat down. The celebration was winding toward its gentler end. Guests drifting into smaller conversations. The musicians playing something slower and softer. Charlotte and Thomas were across the room, leaning toward each other in the way that already looked habitual, like something they had been doing for years. Margaret Hargrove appeared and sat down beside her. Eleanor looked at her. "I won't keep you long," Margaret said. "I only wanted to say—" She paused in the manner of someone choosing words with care. "My son chose well. I did not understand that fully until this week. Charlotte she is steadier than I expected. Steadier than I gave her credit for." "She always has been," Eleanor said. "People mistake her warmth for softness." "Yes." A pause. "They make the same mistake about you, for different reasons." Margaret straightened. "I should like to apologize properly. I was not kind to you when you arrived, and I was not kind again in the hallway, and I was operating on an assumption that, as I said, was convenient rather than accurate." "You were protecting your son," Eleanor said. "I understand the impulse. I was protecting an arrangement," Margaret said with the precision of an honest woman. "Thomas did not need protecting. He needed to marry Charlotte. I was the one who required adjusting." She paused. "It is in my experience always the ones who believe they are protecting others who most need to examine their own motives." Eleanor looked at her. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said, "I think I may have misjudged you as well." The older woman's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something in that direction. "Probably," she said. "We have time to revise." She stood, nodded once, with the particular dignity of a woman who delivers apologies, and walks away without seeking absolution, and rejoined the other guests. Eleanor sat alone for a moment longer. She thought about revision, about the things that change when you are given new information, about how the story you tell yourself about your own life can be built on a lie someone else constructed, and how discovering that lie does not erase the story, it only shows you where the foundation was wrong. She had believed for 3 years that she was a woman who had been found wanting, that a man she had loved had looked at the full picture of her, no fortune, no title, no social weight, and decided the picture was incomplete. She had built herself on top of that belief, stubbornly, fiercely, with genuine results. But the belief had been wrong. And now she had to figure out what to build on top of the truth. The truth was, she had never been found wanting. She had been found deliberately and specifically by someone who wanted her gone, which meant everything she had built in the years since was not a compensation for rejection. It was just her, herself, made stronger by difficulty as things sometimes are, but not made from rejection. Made from her own stubborn, clear-eyed decision to continue. That was a different foundation entirely. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she heard from the doorway to the garden a brief, familiar sound, someone clearing their throat in the particular way of a person who is trying not to interrupt, but very much wants to be noticed. She looked up. Alexander stood in the doorway with 2 glasses and an expression that was carefully neutral in a way that was transparently not neutral at all. "The musicians are playing something slow," he said. She looked at him. "I'm aware," she said. "I thought—" He stopped, started again. "You said no grand gestures." "I did. This is not a grand gesture. It's a dance, at a wedding, which is a completely ordinary occurrence." "Is it?" "Charlotte specifically suggested it," he said. "Unprompted. I want that noted." Eleanor pressed her lips together. "You asked my newly married sister to intervene on your behalf." "She offered," he said. "There's a distinction." "There is no distinction." "I did not reject the offer," he conceded. She stood up. She crossed the room and took the glass he held out and took a sip of it and looked at him steadily. "One dance," she said. "One dance," he agreed immediately, as a man agrees to something when he knows the value of not pushing. They moved to where a few other couples were already dancing, slowly unhurried the music, something gentle and without urgency. He was careful about the distance between them. Not stiff, just careful, respectful of the word time in the way a man is when he has understood that it was not a soft word, but a precise one. They danced. After a moment, Eleanor said, "You're being very measured." "You asked me not to be dramatic." "I didn't say measured. I said not dramatic. What's the difference?" "Measured is performing restraint," she said. "Not dramatic is just being a person." He looked at her. "I'm trying," he said honestly, "to be a person. It turns out 3 years of deciding you've lost something makes you slightly formal about it when you find out you haven't." She looked up at him. Something in her chest turned over quietly. "You haven't lost it," she said. Carefully, precisely, not as a promise, as a fact. "What we were that's not gone. It just needs to find out what it is now, in the people we are now." "I know," he said. "I'm not rushing." "Good. But Eleanor—" He said it quietly, the way he always said her name when what followed was the real thing. "I need you to know that I meant what I said in the garden. Every morning I was away from you, I still thought about what I would have written. It wasn't poetry. Mostly, it was just what I'd seen, what I'd thought about, what reminded me of things you'd said." He paused. 3 years of letters that don't exist. She held his gaze. "Then you have a great deal of material to work with," she said. He exhaled. The music moved around them. Charlotte across the room caught Eleanor's eye over Thomas's shoulder and said nothing. Just looked with that clear-eyed sister look that contains an entire conversation, and then turned back to her husband. And Eleanor Whitmore danced one dance with Alexander Waverley in the house where everything had broken, and decided quietly, and without announcing it to anyone, that broken was not the same as finished. That some things are not destroyed by what happens to them. They are only for a time interrupted. The evening wound toward its end, and she let it. She said goodnight to Charlotte with a hug that lasted long enough to mean something. She accepted Thomas's thanks with genuine warmth. She nodded to Margaret. She said small pleasant things to the remaining guests. And when she finally went upstairs and closed her door and stood in the quiet of her room, the same room where she had stood 5 days ago, pressing her palms against the glass and telling herself she was only here for Charlotte, she realized that the thing she had walked into this house carrying that weight she had not even fully named, because naming it made it too real, was lighter. Not gone. She was not naive enough to believe it was gone. But lighter. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her own hands. A week ago, she had been in Virginia, living her quiet, sufficient, self-constructed life. And she had been fine. She had been genuinely, honestly not performing fine. And now she was here. With the truth. With her sister married. With a man who had written her 37 letters and thought about the next 3 years of them without sending a single one. She had told him she needed time. She had meant it. But she also knew, sitting in this room, in this house, in the particular quiet of a day that had contained an extraordinary amount of living, that time was not the obstacle she had once believed it was. Time properly used was not a wall. It was a door. And she had never, not once in her life, been afraid of what was on the other side of a door. She had only ever been afraid of what it would cost to open it. The next morning she would go home to Virginia. She would return to her life, her work, her father's house, the small independence she had built from scratch. And on a morning not long after, she could not have said which morning, but she was certain of it, with the same certainty she had always known things that mattered, a letter would arrive. Not formal, not grand, just real. Something he had seen, something he had thought, something that reminded him of something she had said. And she would read it, and she would write back. One letter at a time. One honest, unhurried, carefully meant morning letter at a time. Until whatever this was found its shape again in the people they had both become. She lay down. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she did not fall asleep bracing for the morning. She simply fell asleep. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor knew it was from him before she turned it over, because the handwriting on the outside was familiar in the way that certain things are familiar, not because you have seen them recently, but because they are written somewhere in you that does not forget. She was standing in her father's front hallway when the post came, still in her morning dress, and when she saw the envelope, she did not move for a full 10 seconds. Then she took it to her room. She sat by the window. She opened it. It was not long. 3 paragraphs. He had written exactly what he had promised, something he had seen, something he had thought about, something that had reminded him of a thing she once said. The first paragraph was about a book he had found in the library after she left, a collection of essays on the moral philosophy of obligation. He had opened it by accident, reaching for something else, and read the first page, and then the second, and then sat down and read the entire thing in one sitting, because the author kept making arguments in a way that reminded him uncomfortably of the way Eleanor argued, which was to say, precisely without sentimentality, and always toward the thing that was true rather than the thing that was comfortable. The second paragraph was about a morning 2 weeks after the wedding, when he had walked past the chair in the library, her chair, the one she had sat in at midnight when he had come in to find her, and had stood there for longer than was reasonable, thinking about the particular quality of her silence, the way she had sat without needing to fill the quiet. He said he had not met many people in his life who understood that silence was not an absence, but a presence of its own. The third paragraph was 7 words. I am still thinking about what I would write. Eleanor read that 7-word paragraph 3 times. Then she got up, found her writing paper, sat back down, and wrote back. She did not take long. She wrote 1 paragraph about a student she had been tutoring, a girl of 12, with a stubbornness that Eleanor recognized as her own at that age, who had spent 3 lessons refusing to accept that the mathematical formula Eleanor was teaching her was correct, because it contradicted something her previous tutor had told her. Eleanor had finally said, "Who showed you the work, me or him?" And the girl had looked at the page and said slowly, "You." And Eleanor had said, "Then trust the work." And the girl had understood, not because the formula became simpler, but because she had realized that trust is not the same as blind agreement. It is the decision to follow the evidence. She wrote 1 sentence after that. "I think you understand what I'm telling you." She sealed it. She sent it. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later. Longer this time, 6 paragraphs. He wrote about an argument he'd had with his solicitor over an estate matter, and about a conversation with Thomas, in which Thomas had said something so simple and correct that Alexander had thought about it for days afterward. Thomas had said, The problem with most men is that they wait to feel brave before they act. But courage comes after, not before. You act first. The feeling follows. Alexander had written, "I have been thinking about this in relation to you. I acted like a man waiting to feel certain before approaching you. And what I now understand is that certainty is not given. It is chosen. You make the choice, and then it becomes certain. I chose you 3 years ago. I was a coward about what that choice required. I am trying to understand the difference between being certain and being ready. I think I spent 3 years confusing them." Eleanor read that paragraph 4 times. Then she wrote back the same day, which she had not done before. She wrote, "There is a difference between certainty and readiness. You are right about that. Certainty is knowing what you want. Readiness is knowing you can handle what comes with it. I have been certain for longer than I told you. I am still working on ready, but I think the distance is smaller than it was." She almost didn't send it. It was more than she had planned to give yet. She sent it anyway, because she had told herself she would follow the evidence. And the evidence was pointing somewhere she had been trying not to run toward. The third letter arrived in less than 2 weeks. It was one sentence. "Tell me when the distance closes." She held that letter in both hands and felt the particular sharp warmth of someone saying the exact right thing at the exact right moment, and knowing they have said it and choosing not to add anything else because anything else would reduce it. She set it on her windowsill. She did not write back that day. She let herself sit with it the way you sit with something rare, giving it the attention it deserves, not rushing the feeling because it is a good feeling, and you have not had enough of them in recent years, and you are allowed finally to simply have this one for a moment. That night, her father came to find her. He knocked on her door. He always knocked. Had always treated her room as a space that belonged to her, even when she was a child, and came in and sat in the chair by the fireplace, the way he did when he had something to say that required sitting. Her father, Robert Whitmore, was 61 years old, and moved through the world with the particular quiet dignity of a man who had learned that most things worth doing required patience, and most people worth knowing required effort, and neither of these facts had ever discouraged him. He looked at his eldest daughter for a moment. "You've been different since you came back from the wedding," he said. "In what way?" "Lighter," he said simply. Eleanor looked at her hands. "Some things got resolved," she said. "Charlotte told me some of it," he said. "Not all of it. Enough." He paused. "She told me about the letters." Eleanor looked up. "I'm sorry, Papa. I should have told you at the time. I didn't want—" "You didn't want me to see you in pain," he said. Not as an accusation, just as a fact stated with the gentleness of a man who has known his daughter for 30 years and understands the particular brand of her pride. "I know. You've been protecting people from your pain since you were 7 years old. I have always been aware of it and never known quite how to address it without making it worse." Eleanor was very still. "He's writing to you," her father said. "Yes." "Are you writing back?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "He came to see me," her father said. Eleanor's head came up. "When?" "Last week. He rode out to the county, didn't send word ahead, didn't bring his carriage, arrived on horseback like a man who'd decided something and didn't want time to reconsider it." Robert Whitmore's mouth curved. "I respect that." Eleanor stared at him. "He came here." "He came here," her father confirmed. "He sat in this room. He told me what happened 3 years ago, all of it. He told me what he should have done and what he failed to do, and he did not make excuses for any of it." A pause. "Then he asked my permission to continue writing to you." The room was very quiet. "He asked your permission," Eleanor said. "He did." "And what did you say?" Her father looked at her with the steady eyes of a man who has loved someone for 30 years and has never once doubted the quality of that person's judgment. "I told him," Robert Whitmore said, "that my daughter does not require my permission for anything, that she is 30 years old and has been making her own decisions more effectively than most people manage at 60, and that if he wanted to know whether he should continue writing to her, he should ask her. He paused. And then I told him to stay for dinner. Eleanor put both hands over her face. Papa, he's a good man, Eleanor. Imperfect, made mistakes, but honest about them in a way that matters. Her father's voice was quiet and certain. I've been watching you build yourself alone for 3 years, and I have been proud of every single thing you've built. But I would like, if it is something you want to see, you build something with someone who is worth building with. Eleanor lowered her hands. She looked at her father. He looked back at her with the uncomplicated love of a parent who has watched their child survive something hard and is ready carefully and without pressure to watch them be happy. I'm frightened, she said. She had not said it to anyone, not to Charlotte, not to herself, not in any of the letters. I know, he said. I built everything on the assumption that he had left, on being enough on my own, and now if I... She stopped. If I choose this and it goes wrong again, then you will rebuild again, her father said. Because that is what you do. That is what you have always done. He leaned forward slightly. But Eleanor and I say this as someone who loves you without condition. The ability to survive alone is not the same as the requirement to live that way. She looked at him for a long time. He had dinner here, she said finally. He did. And you like him? I think he's the first man I've met who is not intimidated by you, her father said, with the particular satisfaction of a father who has been waiting a long time to say that. Which is, in my opinion, the minimum requirement. Eleanor almost laughed. She felt it rise and let it go real and brief, and her father smiled. Write to him, he said, and stood. Or don't. Either way, you'll make the right decision. You always do. He left. Eleanor sat with her hands in her lap and the letter still on the windowsill, and the fire doing what fire does in a quiet room, and she thought about courage coming after not before. She thought about what it means to choose something before you feel ready. She thought about 37 morning letters and a girl of 12 who had learned to trust the work. She picked up her pen. She wrote, "The distance is closed. Come when you're ready." She sent it before she could revise it into something more cautious. He arrived 11 days later. He did not send word ahead. He came on horseback the same way her father had described, like a man who had made a decision and didn't want time to reconsider it. And when Eleanor heard the hoofbeats in the drive, she was in the front parlor pretending to read, and she stood up so fast the book fell off her lap and she left it on the floor, and walked to the door with a deliberate, measured pace that she absolutely did not feel. She opened the door. He was dismounting at the gate. He looked up when the door opened, and for a second, just 1 second, they were back at the beginning. Him on the steps of Waverley Estate, her stepping out of the carriage. The same held breath, the same recognition. Except this time, there was no bracing. This time, Eleanor stood in the doorway of her father's house, and looked at Alexander Waverley coming through the gate and felt quietly and without performance that she was glad. He came up the path. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I got your letter," he said. "I assumed." "I would have come faster," he said, "but I needed 11 days. "For what?" "To write something worth giving you," he said. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope thick. The paper heavy, the kind of letter that has taken effort. "It's everything I would have written in the past 3 years if I had not been a coward about it. Not all at once, I know you said not dramatic, but I needed you to have it, the full accounting, before we go any further." Eleanor looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "Come inside," she said. He came inside. Her father materialized from somewhere in the house, with the timing of a man who had been waiting, and shook Alexander's hand, and said briefly and warmly something about the ride and the weather, and then disappeared with the tactfulness of a parent who has raised a daughter who does not need management. Eleanor took Alexander to the small sitting room, and she sat and he sat, and she opened the envelope. She read for a long time. He did not speak while she read. He sat across from her with his hands folded and his expression calm in the way that is not the absence of feeling, but the decision to hold it still and he waited. The letter was everything he had said it would be. Not poetic, not arranged. Real in the way that only things written without the intention to impress can be real. He had written about the morning after he received the forged letter. How he had stood at the window of his study and told himself the ache in his chest was pride, and known even as he said it that it was not pride. He had written about the social season that followed the gatherings he attended, the women he was introduced to, the way none of them made him feel the specific quality of engaged that Eleanor had made him feel, simply by walking into a room with an opinion. He had written about the evening he had gone back to the library and sat in the chair she had always used, and tried to remember exactly what she had looked like in it, and had been both relieved and miserable that he could. He had written, "The worst part of the 3 years was not the loneliness. I know how to be alone. The worst part was reading something, or hearing something, or standing somewhere and thinking she would have had something exactly right to say about this, and having no one to say it to." Eleanor set that page face down. She finished the letter. She folded it carefully. She held it in both hands for a moment. "This is the most honest thing anyone has ever written me," she said. "I had 3 years of material," he said. "Alexander." He looked at her. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need to say it once completely so that we can move forward with it said, and not have it sitting between us unsaid." "All right," he said carefully. "What Victoria did, the lie, the letters, the 3 years, I am not going to spend the rest of my life being defined by it. I refuse. I refuse to be the woman who was almost destroyed by someone else's jealousy. I am not almost destroyed. I am here. I am whole. I am, if anything." She paused. "More certain of what I want than I have ever been, because I spent 3 years finding out what I am without it. And I know now that I am sufficient on my own, which means that what I choose from this point forward is a genuine choice, not a need, not a rescue." She looked at him directly. "I choose you, not your title, not this estate, not the life that comes with the name. You, the man who wrote me 37 morning letters and meant every word. That is what I am choosing." Alexander did not move. "I know what I'm asking for in return," she continued. "I am asking for honesty. I am asking for the courage to come to me when something is wrong, instead of deciding for me what I can and cannot handle. I am asking you to trust that I am capable of difficult conversations, and that silence is never the kindness it appears to be." She held his eyes. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "I am not asking for perfection." "Good," he said quietly, "because I have already demonstrated comprehensively that I cannot offer it." "I know. I'm not asking for it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm asking for honesty, which is harder." "I know it is," he said, "and I am going to spend whatever time you give me proving that I understand the difference." A pause. "Eleanor, can I say something?" "Yes. I know you are sufficient on your own. I have known that since the first week I spent with you 3 years ago. I have never doubted it. What I want, what I am here for, is not to complete you. You are already complete." He looked at her with that unguarded expression she had first seen in the hallway of his estate after the wedding, and had been thinking about ever since. "I simply want to be next to you while you're being complete, if you'll have me." The sitting room was very quiet. Eleanor set the letter on the table between them. She looked at the man across from her, the one who had written 37 morning letters and 3 years of unsent ones, and an honest accounting thick enough to hold in both hands, and she made the choice. Not because she felt ready, because she had decided. "Have dinner with us tonight," she said. He exhaled. "Yes," he said. "And tomorrow?" She stood. "You can start the next letter." He stood too. "I already know what I'm going to say," he said. "Write it anyway," she said. "I like having them." She walked to the door of the sitting room. She stopped. Without turning, she said, "Alexander, for what it's worth, I thought about what I would have written too. Every morning, for 3 years." She paused. You were not alone in that. She heard him inhale. She walked out to find her father. The months that followed were quiet by the standards of what had come before them. And Eleanor was grateful for that quiet, in the specific way you are grateful for things after you understand what their absence costs. Letters came and went between Virginia and Waverly Estate, with a frequency that was not urgent, but was consistent. The way things are consistent when they are built on purpose rather than impulse. He came to see her twice more before winter. Once for a week, when her father's health required a second set of hands around the property, and Alexander had appeared without being asked, simply because she had mentioned in a letter that the fence posts along the north field needed replacing before the cold came, and when he arrived, she had found him already in conversation with the hired hand about the quality of the wood. She had stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment, a duke in his shirt sleeves discussing fence posts in the autumn cold, and felt something settle permanently into place in a way that no title or estate or social arrangement ever could have manufactured. "You didn't have to come," she'd said when he came inside. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." That was all. That was enough. The second visit was at Christmas, when Charlotte and Thomas came to stay with the family for the week, and the house was full, in the way that houses become full when people who love each other choose to occupy the same space. Thomas and Alexander spent 3 evenings in her father's study discussing land management and crop rotation and legal frameworks for estate inheritance with the comfortable ease of men who have discovered they are genuinely interested in the same things. Charlotte pulled Eleanor aside on Christmas morning and said with the directness that had always been her particular gift, "Are you going to marry him?" Eleanor looked at her sister. "Yes," she said. "When did you decide?" "The fence posts," Eleanor said. Charlotte stared at her. "The fence." "He came and helped with the fence posts," Eleanor said, without being asked, in his shirt sleeves, in the cold. Charlotte was quiet for a second. "That is the most Eleanor Whitmore reason to agree to marry someone that I have ever heard," she said, and hugged her fiercely. He asked her on a January morning, the way he did everything important directly without performance, in a moment that was not arranged to be memorable, but became so anyway simply by containing the truth. They were in her father's kitchen. She was making tea. He was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, and the particular expression he wore when he was working up to something, which she had learned to recognize because it involved a very slight tension in his jaw and a tendency to look at the middle distance instead of at her. "Eleanor," he said. She set down the kettle. She turned. He looked at her. "I have written you 43 letters since the wedding," he said, "including the 3 years of ones I gave you all at once. 43 letters. And I have been to see you 4 times. And every time I have come here, and every time I have opened one of your letters, I have felt the specific quality of rightness. The thing that means you are in the exact place you are supposed to be doing the thing you are supposed to do." He paused. "I feel that quality when I am near you, Eleanor. Every single time, and I have not felt it in any other context in my life." She looked at him. "I am asking you to marry me," he said. "Not as a duke asking a gentleman's daughter. Not as any kind of social arrangement or exchange or obligation. As a man who has loved you since a summer afternoon in a library 3 years ago, asking the only woman he has ever wanted to stand beside him in the specific daily, actual life of being 2 people choosing each other." He held her gaze. "I am asking you to choose me, knowing fully what that means and what it costs and what it requires. I will not pretend it is simple." "It's not simple," she agreed. "I know." "I will not be a quiet duchess," she said. "I know. I will have opinions about estate management. I am counting on it. And I will not stop tutoring. It matters to me, and I will not give it up. Eleanor." He said her name with the patient warmth of a man who has been reading her letters for 4 months and knows exactly who he is talking to. "I am not asking you to give up a single thing that makes you yourself. I am asking you to add one thing to the life you have already built. Me." She looked at him for a long moment. He waited. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. She turned back to the kettle because the tea was going cold, and she needed a second to simply feel the thing she was feeling without having it witnessed, which was the right thing to need, and he understood that because he said nothing and did not move until she turned back around with 2 cups of tea and handed him one. He took it. Their fingers touched at the handoff. Neither of them made it into anything. They drank their tea in the kitchen in the January morning, and it was the most ordinary moment Eleanor Whitmore had ever been inside, and it was exactly what she had always wanted. They were married in March in the same county chapel where Charlotte had married Thomas, small, true, surrounded by the people who had known Eleanor her entire life, and by a handful of people from Alexander's world who had made the journey because they genuinely wished him well. Charlotte stood at Eleanor's right shoulder and cried without apology, which was extremely. Charlotte and Thomas stood at Alexander's left and did not cry, but came very close, which was extremely Thomas. Her father walked her down the aisle, and when he reached Alexander, he looked at him for a long moment, the look of a father taking the full measure of the man his daughter has chosen. And then he shook his hand and nodded once and stepped back. Alexander said his vows without notes, looking at her in a voice that did not waver. Eleanor said hers back in a voice that was steady because she meant every word. And when you mean every word, there is nothing to be nervous about. When the minister said they were married, Alexander did not perform the moment. He looked at her face for 1 second, reading it the way he had always read her, carefully, directly, without rushing. And then he kissed her with the quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision and knows it is right. The chapel was very warm. Afterward, standing in the bright March cold outside with her husband's hand in hers, and Charlotte on one side, and her father on the other, and Thomas already laughing at something Alexander had said. Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor Waverley felt the last of the weight she had been carrying lift. Not violently, not all at once. The way ice leaves a river in early spring, gradually, then completely, and then the water runs clear and fast, and you think, yes. That is how it was always supposed to move. She had spent 3 years believing that being found wanting was the truth of her. She had spent 5 days at a wedding discovering that the truth had been buried under someone else's lie. She had spent 4 months rebuilding trust, one honest letter at a time. And she had spent the rest of the time since January, the time since she had said yes over 2 cups of tea in her father's kitchen, understanding that what she had now was not a rescue and not a restoration. It was something new, something that had not existed before, something built by 2 people who had each survived the worst thing that had happened to them, and had chosen with full knowledge of what choosing cost to build together instead of separately. That was not a fairy tale. That was better than a fairy tale. That was real. Charlotte appeared at her elbow and bumped her shoulder gently with the particular sister language of someone who wants to say something important and cannot find the words for it. Eleanor bumped her back. Charlotte reached over and took her hand. They stood together in the March cold and watched Alexander say something to their father that made the older man laugh, a real laugh, the kind Eleanor had not heard often enough from him in the difficult years. And Eleanor felt her heart turn over with a gratitude so complete she could not have named all of what it was grateful for. For Charlotte, who had not let her stand alone. For Thomas, who had been dignified in his grief. For her father, who had told her the ability to survive alone was not the same as the requirement to live that way. For Alexander, who had come on horseback without sending word ahead and helped with fence posts in his shirt sleeves in the cold. And for herself. For the woman who had burned 37 letters and built a life from the ash and arrived at a stone-stepped estate with her back straight and her chin level and her heart, despite everything, still intact. She had thought she was coming to that wedding for Charlotte. She had come for herself too. She had just not known it yet. Years later, when people asked Eleanor Waverley how she had found her way back to the man she had loved and lost and found again, she gave different answers depending on who was asking. To strangers, she said it was complicated. To Charlotte, she said the fence posts. To her father, she said nothing because he already knew. And to Alexander one evening in the library, that had always been theirs. The fire going, the two armchairs pulled close, a book open in her lap that she was not reading when he looked up from his letter and caught her watching him and said very quietly, "What are you thinking about?" she said. "That I am exactly where I chose to be." He looked at her. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered the word, the full weight of it, what it had cost her, what it had required, what she had had to build and burn and rebuild to arrive at a place where it was not a complicated question. "Yes," she said, simply, completely, without reservation. He looked back at his letter. She looked back at her book. The fire moved in the fireplace. Outside, the roses were beginning to bud, and Eleanor Waverley, who had once burned 37 letters and told herself she felt nothing, sat in the warmth of the life she had chosen and felt for the first time in a very long time everything.